Hi, welcome back to my channel. My name is Laura and today I'm going to do my Manga Monday's recommendations video. Except for that this week I'm not talking about manga. So it's not really a Manga Monday, it's a Manhwa Monday. Today I'm going to talk about manhwa, which are comics that come out of South Korea. At any rate, the reason that I picked this, of course, was because the Olympics had just happened in South Korea, and so I thought that, you know, people were kind of already had Korea on their mind, so maybe this would be a good topic. And then as I was putting it together, I was thinking to myself, why did I choose this topic? It is so difficult for me to put together a list. I have a lot of manhwa in my collection. I actually have a pretty substantial manhwa collection, but most of what I own, probably excluding 2 titles, maybe 3, are all out of print, which I don't necessarily want to be recommending because it's harder to get your hands on them. And the other thing is that I haven't read them since they were released, so a lot of these titles I've read, but I haven't read them in 10 years, so I remember liking them, but I don't remember anything about them. So for the last 2 weeks or so, I've been kind of scrounging around trying to read as much as I can of manhwa. And I have put together a list, certainly not exhaustive, and this was way more difficult than I had anticipated it to be. So normally it doesn't take me a lot of work to put together a list, but manhwa, as you know, is not like my top favorite type of comic. I like manga. I feel like I understand manga. I've been reading it for a long time. Manhwa is very similar, and I think a lot of the times, especially when I was new, and maybe this has happened with you as well, that when I went to buy comics I didn't realize that there was a difference, or I wouldn't notice a difference until I started reading it. There is a difference. It's a completely different country. Of course there's going to be a difference. Stylistically there are quite a lot of similarities. They still have those stylized forms that are really similar to the manga style that everyone's familiar with. But I would say that in manhwa, kind of the 2 things that stand out are the way that mouths are drawn. There's usually high detailing in mouths, especially in girls' comics, where the mouths are drawn with quite a lot of like lip creases, which is a significant difference from when you read manga. The other thing is that character features are quite a bit more angular, in a very like long and elegant form. So there is just an initial stylistic difference. I'm not saying that manga doesn't also have these features, but you see it more prevalently in manhwa. There are, of course, other differences stylistically, but those are the 2 that kind of stand out, at least for me. And, you know, the reason that you get kind of confused, like initially you just sort of superficially see, oh, these look similar, it must be the same. Not only that, they're published by the same publishers. There were a few publishers that were exclusive to manhwa. I don't think any of them are in business anymore as far as I know. And so I think whoever is left publishing manhwa, which are not very many, are publishing it under the same imprints as they publish their manga, and so it comes out looking like manga. If you go and shop on Right Stuff, for example, all of their manhwa is actually called manga. They just call it that. It's not manga. It is similar, but it's not. And so I just wanted to talk about it a little bit. Even though it was really difficult for me to put together, I do have a few titles that I wanted to recommend. Hopefully you'll have a chance to kind of look at them and see some of the differences. And hopefully you'll have a chance to pick some of these titles up, even though they are mostly going to be out of print titles. It's really interesting to read something similar to manga, especially if manga is the core thing that you read like I do. If you read something that's really similar, the differences become quite a bit more pronounced. So it's almost like they're so different, to me at least, because they look so similar, or there is a similarity to them. They just seem so polar opposite when you read them. The stories are different, the way the characters relate are different, the expressions are different, you know, the iconography is different, and the style is different. The only thing that's the same are the publishers, so anyway, I think it's an interesting thing to read. Certainly not the thing that I pick up the most frequent, and as you'll be able to see from here that I mostly pick up kind of the girls comics in manhwa. I don't have a lot of really gritty or seinen-y titles, you know, the men's demographic. I have a couple, but for the most part I have gravitated towards the girls, you know, romance comics. So that's what I'm going to share with you. Anyway, let's see what I have. The first title that I am going to share with you is Pig Bride by Kook and SuJin Kim. This is a pretty short title. It's about 8 volumes long, I think, and maybe even shorter, maybe it's 6. I can't remember exactly at the moment, but it is published by Yen Press, so it is in their standard large format, and it is sort of a romance fantasy. It takes that story where a boy is lost in the woods. He comes across a little girl, and he comes across a little girl, and he is brought to the girl's mother, and the mother says, we will not let you leave this place until you agree to marry my daughter. And so as a child, this 8-year-old boy, he is forced into marriage with this little girl, and then he is sent back to his own family. Of course, the kind of agreement is that when he comes of age, then the daughter will go and live with him, and they will start their married relationship. That is who this pig bride is, this girl with a pig mask on. So she ends up showing up when he turns 16, 17, and he has sort of always believed that this experience that he had up until this point was a dream. You know, he constantly is dreaming about this old experience that he had, but he just believes it a dream. And so when this girl shows up, he realizes that what he's experienced is true. He is kind of the typical, like, really cocky, kind of full of himself, really cool boy. You know, he's great at everything, he's really smart, and not only that, he is extremely wealthy. He's from a very affluent family, and so he is sort of the top elite, and everybody wants to be in a relationship with him because it will secure their future or secure their business. And so the fact that this girl comes in and claims to be already married to this boy is already kind of an issue. But because of sort of the fantasy elements, his family is already somewhat aware or prepared for this experience to happen, and so they are kind of encouraging this relationship to continue. He, of course, is trying to avoid it at all costs. And then about halfway through, you realize that there is a lot of connection to do with past lives and reincarnation, and that becomes a big focus on this story. You may find it strange, or at least when you're reading it, because you are a Western audience, you'll see, oh, pig mask, that means that she's really ugly, or, you know, fat, or whatever, you know, those sort of content of what does a pig mean in North American society. So it really isn't about that, and so when you're reading it, it kind of is hard to disassociate from your North American perceptions of icons, but in Korean culture, a pig is actually a symbol of fortune, a symbol of good luck, and so she is actually coming to be a very lucky item for him. So it is actually a pretty decent story. It's got a lot packed in to a very short series. And it is still somewhat in print. After I read this, I went and looked online, and I think there was only 1 volume I couldn't find on Amazon, so it must be available, at least for a short time, on some site somewhere. So if you are interested in this title, I would say pick it up now, because it'll be incredibly hard to find soon. But I think at the moment you might get lucky. The next title I wanted to recommend to you is more actually of an author recommendation. This is supposed to be the most renowned manhwa creator in Korea. I suspect he's not a very modern creator, and his work is incredibly gritty and has a very stylized look to it that is different than the rest of the stories that I'm going to show you. And that would be Hyun Se Lee. As far as I know, he only has these 2 titles published in English, Nambul War Stories and Hardboiled Angel. I haven't read Hardboiled Angel yet. I had only finished reading Nambul War Stories last year, so I haven't moved on yet. I have, you know, tons of other things to read, but I will definitely be getting to it. Hardboiled Angel is supposed to be about a woman investigator during a rash of serial murders, and so she gets involved in that. And Nambul War Stories is an alternate retelling of World War II, where Japan and Korea are kind of starting up this new war between them. It's very brutal, it's very gritty, and it's horrible. And it ends at a really terrible spot. Neither of these, as far as I know, were complete in English. This one ends at a spot that it's one of the worst images ever that I could see in a comic. And it doesn't conclude, so it's very unsatisfying for me because I need it to conclude so I can get over this instance of torture that's occurring on the last page. It also is, I suspect, some true aspects of the Korean and Japan tension. There is quite a lot of dislike of Japanese society, culture, people in this book, which is also really interesting because I read primarily Japanese manga, so this is a really interesting title to read. His work is got this unique style, so you can see it here, and it's just very distinct and different from anything that I've read, and it's just sort of an experience to read. Hopefully I'm not showing you anything too horrible, but it definitely feels like it's worth reading. And you know, even though I'm very affected by this story, I think that that's actually a good sign that a story is, even if it is incredibly brutal, it feels very true to a situation that could occur. And so I think it's definitely worth checking out if you have an opportunity, just sort of for his storytelling and his art style alone, even if you don't get to have the complete story. And CPM was very clever and actually did mark it as manhwa, so that was very nice of them. Another title that I really enjoy and recommend, especially if you're into more girls manga, this is Very Very Sweet by Shin and Gio. I recently read another title by this duo called Chocolate, which also was really fun, but this one was my favorite of their work. This is essentially the story about this boy here on the cover, and he's, you know, quite cool and fashionable, and he is told by his grandfather, who of course is part of a well-to-do family, that he isn't in fact Japanese. He's been living in Japan with his family, but it turns out that his heritage is actually Korean, and so his grandfather actually sends him to South Korea to kind of straighten out his personality because he's gotten a little too full of himself. And of course his new next door neighbor ends up being a girl who understands him, I guess, is basically what it is. They end up forming a bond through their mutual love of cats, which is really cute. The title is called Very Very Sweet, and it really is very very sweet. It's just a really likable story, and the relationships are likable, and the way that his past relationships, you know, there's always going to be that character that comes in and really kind of disturbs the main couple in whatever part of their relationship. There's that character that comes in and just causes problems by, you know, saying, I have a prior claim or whatever, and comes in and is a nuisance. There is that character, but it's resolved in such a way that I really appreciated it. It sort of just is diffused really quickly. It just doesn't last so long, because I really hate that character whenever it shows up in shoujo manga, so I like the way that it's handled so much more in this particular title. The next title I want to recommend is Threads of Time by Mi Young Noh. This was published by Tokyo Pop, you know, back in the early 2000s, so it is definitely out of print. It might be a little hard to find, and a little bit harder still because it is a longer series. So this one's about 15 volumes long. It's behind a stack here, so I can't actually see from where I'm sitting, so I think it's around that long, but I'll definitely put it down in the description when I post this video. So this is essentially what I would say is equivalent to a shonen fantasy manga. It is a story that stars a boy who has kind of a tough background. He's kind of a tough student, or, you know, a gangster-like student. And he is pulled from modern day and ends up waking up as a character from the past. So waking up as this young lord. The young lord in this ancient Korean society has been asleep for several years, and he has been in a coma, and he just wakes up one day, but he's waking up with a consciousness of this boy. And so this boy here is trying to figure out, well, who is he now? How did he get here? And now, like, what does he need to do? It does constantly flash back where he is sort of transported back and forth between time periods, and kind of there is that connection between, like, something is going on. You find out very quickly that this man from the ancient world, ancient Korea anyway, has a twin sister who's also been in a coma for just as long, and he remembers her, and so there has some connection between how he got into this ancient Korean body, and has something to do with her. There's some reason that she has kind of called him from the other side. There are, of course, friends on his modern day life side who are aware of something going on with him, who are trying to kind of help him get back. And then, of course, the kind of confusion about what do you do now while you are living the life of somebody else. So it's actually really good. It's pretty well written. It's quite exciting to read. It definitely grabs you while you're reading it. It's not the best translation. There's just some issues with it. But I actually really have a lot of fun reading this one, so it's pretty good. It's just a little bit hard to find these days, so unfortunately there's that, but a fun title to check out, especially if you're interested in that shonen fantasy type manga. And then the last title that I wanted to recommend is, again, another author recommendation. I have two titles by this author. I don't know if others are published, and that is Sirial. Sirial is the author of One Fine Day, as well as Milky Way Hitchhiking. I have read both of these this year. I haven't finished reading Milky Way Hitchhiking, but I will be doing that for sure because it is absolutely wonderful. One Fine Day is a 3-volume series, so it's pretty easy to pick up. It was published by Yen Press. I think it's still in print, and if it's not, it's probably not super hard to find, at least compared to some of the other titles. This is essentially the story about 3 small kind of children. They're actually animals, but they're drawn as anthropomorphic children. They have the personality of children, animal hybrids, I guess. They are kept by a wizard, and they love living with this wizard. It's just very sweet, simple, day-to-day life. It's things like getting the wizard his slippers, or, you know, making pancakes, or going out in the rain, or just whatever little sweet, simple stories you could possibly imagine. It is one of the cutest things you will probably ever read. So there's a dog, a mouse, and a cat, and they're just really good friends, and they live inside a house, and every day they have a little tiny adventure. But they're not like adventurous adventures, they're just like simple daily life. So if you're into kind of the slice of life type stories, and you like something that's incredibly sweet and very harmless, then this is definitely something that you should check out. The other title is probably going to be my #1 recommendations from this video. It is Milky Way Hitchhiking. It's a story about this cat here. It is a bunch of short stories, sort of. And basically what it is that this cat is kind of from the stars and continues to travel around the world and has encounters with humans, so they kind of adopt this cat as their own, and it's sort of almost poetic in the way that it is written, or it kind of feels like a children's picture book in the way that it is written. It's a very simple flowing language, very simple flowing stories. They're just sort of they're almost cerebral the way that they're written, but they're incredibly beautiful and just like really heartwarming and just incredibly cozy. So this is something that I'm currently reading, and it's just absolutely adorable. The other thing that it is that it's fully color illustrated. This is actually one of the nicest publications that I have from Yen Press. It's on a really thick gloss page, and then it's got these really beautiful light watercolors. It's got these really light watercolor illustrations in it, which is just absolutely adorable. The cat, as you could tell, is quite stylized in the illustrations. And it's just really, really sweet, just sort of everyday. I wouldn't say that it's sad, it just sort of feels on the cusp of just poignant in a way, but it's just very cozy to read and absolutely beautiful to look at. So this was published in 2014. It's only 2 volumes long, so it shouldn't be so hard to find. I doubt that there was a huge print run for it though, because I just can't imagine that there was a, you know, huge run on this title, but it's so pretty and so beautiful, and I would urge you to check it out if you have an opportunity, because it's delightful. It's definitely the prettiest manhwa title in my collection, and just probably the coziest read in my collection, just in general. So it's really, really adorable, and I would highly recommend it. So these are my recommendations for manhwa for Manga Monday. There's definitely many more titles that I could choose. I just haven't had a chance to read them and like remind myself why they're really great. There's lots of titles in my collection that I remember reading and really enjoying. The problem is that a lot of them, well, besides being out of print, that a lot of them never finish getting published, and so there's so many, I would say probably 70% of the manhwa in my collection is incomplete. So it's also hard to recommend things based on that. I have obviously done that. Anyway, what I want to know from you, because this was hard for me to put together, and even though, you know, I have a lot of titles, I don't feel like I buy a lot, especially these days. So what I want to know from you is, have you read any manhwa, and what do you recommend? I would love to add some manhwa to my collection, or to read some more manhwa, so I would definitely be up for recommendations. Let me know, especially if it's still in print. That would be great. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye for now.